The morning was cold and damp, the kind of morning that made your bones ache. Elvis Presley woke up to the sound of his phone ringing persistently. It was early, too early, but he knew who it was. His father, Vernon, sounded frantic on the other end of the line. "Elvis, it's your mom. She's in the hospital. You need to come home right now." Elvis's heart sank. His mother, Gladys, had been unwell for a while, but he hadn't expected this. He was on a break from his military training at Fort Hood, Texas, a place that was far from the comfort of home. Without a second thought, he rushed to get dressed and called his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, to arrange an emergency leave. The trip back to Memphis was a blur. Elvis's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and fears. His mother was his rock, the one person who always believed in him no matter what. She had been there through the highs and the lows, from his first guitar to his first hit, from his rise to stardom to the backlash he faced from critics. She was the glue that held the family together, and now she was slipping away. When he finally arrived at the hospital, Gladys was barely hanging on. Her face was pale, and her eyes were closed. Elvis rushed to her side, holding her hand tightly. "Mom, I'm here, he whispered, his voice breaking. For a moment, her eyes fluttered open, and she managed a weak smile. "My boy," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you're going to be okay," but it wasn't enough. The next morning, Elvis was woken by the sound of his father's voice on the phone. "Elvis, your mom. She's gone." The words hit him like a punch in the gut. He rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. His mother was gone, and with her, a part of him died. The funeral was a somber affair, attended by family, friends, and a sea of reporters. Elvis and his father were both devastated, but Colonel Parker, always the master of public relations, managed the event with precision. Despite his grief, Elvis had to be strong. His fans were there too, many of them in tears, offering their condolences and support. But nothing could fill the void that Gladys's death had left in his heart. After the funeral, Elvis returned to Fort Hood, his heart heavy and his mind numb. He had to continue his military service, but everything felt different now. The camaraderie with his fellow soldiers, the routine of army life, none of it mattered as much as it did before. He had lost the one person who truly understood him, and the world seemed a little darker without her. But life in the army went on. Elvis adjusted, finding solace in the routine and the companionship of his fellow soldiers. They respected him, not just for his fame, but for his willingness to do his part just like everyone else. He even invited some of his comrades over to the house where his father, grandmother, and friends were staying, trying to create a sense of normalcy in the midst of his grief. In September, Elvis received orders to deploy to Germany. The news was bittersweet. On one hand, it meant leaving the familiar surroundings of Fort Hood and the comfort of his family. On the other, it was a chance to start anew, to find a way to move forward without his mother. Before he left, he made sure to say goodbye to everyone, promising to write and stay in touch. The day of his departure was a media circus. Fans had gathered at the Army terminal in Brooklyn, hoping for one last glimpse of their hero. Elvis, ever the professional, handled the press with grace and humor. When asked about his future, he joked, "I'll starve to death, sir," but his words were tinged with a sense of uncertainty. As he boarded the transport ship, he looked back at the crowd, his heart heavy but his spirit unbroken. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was determined to honor his mother's memory and continue living the life she had always believed he could. The ship set sail, and Elvis stood at the railing, watching as the American shore faded into the distance. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the journey ahead. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He would carry his mother's love and strength with him, no matter where life took him. Elvis Presley's life in Germany was a mix of military routine, celebrity spectacle, and personal growth. When he arrived in October, he was greeted by a crowd of fans and reporters, but he was quickly sent to the small town of Friedberg, about 200 miles away. There he underwent processing and held another press conference before the Army declared him off limits to the media. This marked the beginning of his life as a soldier. Elvis's family soon joined him. His father, Vernon, managed finances and kept in touch with Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager. His grandmother, Minnie, whom he affectionately called Dodger, cooked his favorite meals and provided emotional support. They initially stayed at a hotel, but after causing some disturbances, they moved to a more secluded house in Bad Nauheim, where they would live for the next 2 years. Elvis's daily routine was similar to his days as a truck driver for Crown Electric. He took a taxi to the base every morning, often returning for lunch. Most evenings he spent at home with his friends Lamar and Red, listening to records and playing music. One of his new friends, Charlie Hodge, was also a musician, while Rex Mansfield and Joe Esposito became part of his inner circle. On weekends, they played touch football and went on trips to cities like Munich and Paris. Despite his close relationship with Anita Wood, whom he wrote to regularly, Elvis dated other women in Germany. Elizabeth Stefaniak, the German stepdaughter of an American soldier, became his secretary and handled his fan mail. She and several other young women spent time with Elvis, which upset Elizabeth when she realized Elvis was not interested in monogamy. In September 1959, Elvis met Priscilla Beaulieu, a 14-year-old girl whose father was an Air Force captain. Priscilla was mature for her age and quickly became a regular at Elvis's house. She was impressed by his manners and sincerity, and they often spent long hours talking about his mother, his career, and his worries. Elvis was protective of their relationship and insisted they remain chaste, even when Priscilla wanted to be more intimate. However, he continued to have sexual relationships with other women without her knowledge. During the day, Elvis performed his military duties, driving for a sergeant and participating in reconnaissance and maneuvers. It was during these exercises that he first tried amphetamines, which many soldiers used to stay awake. Elvis began using them on weekends, convincing his friends to join him. The drugs affected his behavior, making him moody and sometimes difficult to be around. Without his mother's influence, Elvis's ego sometimes got the best of him. He enjoyed being the center of attention and often acted entitled. His friends who were drawn to his celebrity often indulged his behavior. For example, they let him play quarterback in their football games and even gave him a Most Valuable Player trophy. Elvis's relationships with women were also affected. He was generous and sensitive, but could be jealous and controlling. He demanded that Elizabeth not date anyone else, even though he was involved with Priscilla and others. Priscilla also had to be careful about what she said, especially when they were with his friends, as Elvis wanted to maintain a tough image. Family drama added to the stress. Vernon had an affair with Dee Stanley, the wife of an American sergeant, which upset Elvis. He was particularly upset because it felt like an insult to his mother's memory. Vernon and Dee eventually got a divorce and married each other, but Elvis did not attend the ceremony. Instead, he visited his mother's grave the next day. During his time in Germany, Elvis stayed connected to his music and career. He listened to records, kept track of the music industry, and worked on his vocal technique with Charlie Hodge. He wanted to improve his range and sing more ballads, a genre he had previously avoided. Colonel Parker kept Elvis informed about business deals and kept his name in the news, ensuring that Elvis's star remained bright. Elvis's time in Germany was a period of growth and change. He faced new challenges, both personal and professional, but he emerged from it ready to return to civilian life and continue his career as a top entertainer. Elvis Presley returned from the Army in March 1960, and the world seemed to have changed around him. Instead of derailing his career, his military service had enhanced it, opening up new opportunities in Hollywood and solidifying his image as a reliable and mature entertainer. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, had been working tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that Elvis's return would be a triumphant one. When Elvis arrived at Graceland, the small building behind the mansion was swarming with reporters and photographers. On March 7, 1960, Elvis faced the press, answering questions about his military service and his plans for the future. He was casual and charming, but there was a newfound maturity in his demeanor. When asked for advice for young men facing military service, Elvis said, "Play it straight and do your best." He emphasized the importance of following the rules and not trying to be different, as it would only make the experience more difficult. Parker's strategic publicity efforts had paid off. Elvis's image had become more wholesome, and he was now seen as a responsible citizen who had served his country. Even before his discharge, Parker had secured major movie deals and a guest spot on Frank Sinatra's television special. Sinatra, who had once criticized Elvis, now welcomed him with open arms. The special, which aired in May 1960, featured Elvis performing two new songs, Stuck on You and Witchcraft. The latter, a duet with Sinatra, was a standout moment, demonstrating Elvis's versatility and ability to perform sophisticated material. Elvis's return to the recording studio was equally successful. In early April, he recorded 12 songs including Stuck on You, which quickly topped the charts. The album Elvis is Back showcased a wider range of material, from ballads to country, inflected pop and blues-influenced rockers. Songs like A Mess of Blues and Reconsider Baby were particularly standout tracks, displaying Elvis's growth as a vocalist. One of the most significant changes in Elvis's music was his exploration of ballads. It's Now or Never, a reworked version of an Italian folk song, became a massive hit and reached No. 1 on the charts. Are You Lonesome Tonight and Surrender followed, both becoming top hits as well. These ballads demonstrated Elvis's ability to connect with his audience on a deeper emotional level. Elvis's post-Army recordings were not just about hit singles. The Nashville sessions in 1960 and 1961 produced some of his most accomplished work. He recorded a stellar gospel album, His Hand in Mine, which reached No. 13 on the charts. Songs like I Feel So Bad, his latest Flame, and Good Luck Charm continued to showcase his versatility and vocal prowess. However, by early 1962, Colonel Parker decided that Elvis should focus more on movie soundtracks to avoid flooding the market. Elvis agreed, and this shift in focus began to take a toll on his musical creativity. Despite the commercial success of albums like GI Blues and Blue Hawaii, Elvis felt a growing sense of disillusionment. Making music was his true passion, and the constraints of producing soundtrack after soundtrack left him feeling creatively stifled. Elvis's success in Hollywood and his newfound respectability had come at a cost. While he had achieved the mainstream success he had always craved, the path to becoming a serious actor had become increasingly difficult. As he navigated the demands of the film industry and the expectations of his fans, Elvis found himself longing for the freedom and creativity he had once enjoyed in the recording studio. Despite the challenges, Elvis continued to push forward, always seeking new ways to express himself and connect with his audience. Elvis Presley's career took a significant turn after his return from the Army. Recording soundtracks for movies became a major part of his work, but it didn't feel the same as his earlier sessions. The songs he had to perform were often chosen to fit the plots of films, and many of them were not very good. This meant that Elvis had to sing songs that were sometimes silly or just plain bad, which was a far cry from the high-quality material he used to work with. As a result, fewer songwriters wanted to write for him, and those who did often produced trite and formulaic songs. For example, the soundtrack for the film Girls, Girls, Girls included a great song, Return to Sender, which reached No. 2 on the charts, but it also had a song called Song of the Shrimp, which was pretty forgettable. Elvis tried his best with these poor-quality songs, but recording became more of a routine and less of a passion. Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker, also limited his public appearances and live performances. Before Elvis returned from the Army, Parker had many offers for concerts and TV shows, but he turned most of them down. After Elvis came back, he was busy making movies and recording soundtracks, which left little time for tours. However, Parker did arrange a few benefit concerts for good causes. In December 1960, Elvis performed at Ellis Auditorium in Memphis, raising over $50,000 for local charities. He looked like he had never stopped performing, and the audience was captivated. A month later, he performed in Honolulu to help pay for a memorial to the USS Arizona. These shows were a reminder of Elvis's incredible stage presence, but they were rare. Parker and Elvis believed that movies were the future for his career. Elvis was eager to become a serious actor, and Parker lined up several film projects to help him achieve this. The first of these was GI Blues, a musical comedy about an American serviceman in Germany. The movie was a big hit at the box office, but it wasn't very good. The songs were mostly forgettable, and Elvis's character was too wholesome and lacked depth. When Elvis complained about the songs and some of the ridiculous scenes, Parker and the producer, Hal Wallis, told him that this type of light-hearted, family-friendly entertainment was a good foundation for more serious roles to come. However, privately, Wallis had doubts about Elvis's acting abilities and thought that movies like GI Blues were perfect for him. Elvis's next film, Flaming Star, was a western where he played a half-breed character. The role had originally been intended for Marlon Brando, and the director, Don Siegel, was not happy when Elvis got the part. Unfortunately, Siegel and Elvis did not get along, and Elvis's performance was stiff and uncomfortable. The movie did not do well at the box office, which was a disappointment. Elvis's next film, Wild in the Country, had a lot of potential. Based on a critically acclaimed novel, it offered Elvis a chance to play a sensitive, troubled young man. The director, Philip Dunn, was determined to make a serious and substantive movie. However, studio executives and Parker insisted on adding more songs and some silly scenes. Elvis felt embarrassed and uncommitted, and his performance was flat. The movie was a relative flop, which confirmed Parker's belief that Elvis should stick to light-hearted, profitable films. Elvis's insecurity on set was partly due to his increased use of amphetamines. He and his friends would take these drugs to stay energetic, and then use sleeping pills to rest. This cycle of drug use affected his focus and performance. In front of the camera, Elvis often seemed stiff and rushed, which made it difficult for him to rise to the next level as an actor. Despite these challenges, Elvis's next movie, Blue Hawaii, was a huge success. It was a musical comedy that fit Elvis's talents well. The director, Norman Taurog, encouraged Elvis to be more relaxed and enjoy the experience. The movie was filmed partly on location in Hawaii and featured Elvis as a tour guide who falls in love. Elvis's performance was competent, and he looked handsome and charming. The movie was a hit with his fans, who enjoyed seeing him in a more mature and adult role. These experiences showed that Elvis was most successful when he played roles that were tailored to his strengths and charm. While he had dreams of becoming a serious actor, the pressures and constraints of the film industry made it difficult for him to achieve this goal. Nevertheless, Elvis continued to be a beloved and charismatic star, and his fans loved seeing him on the big screen. Elvis Presley's career in Hollywood took a significant turn with the release of Blue Hawaii. Before this film, Elvis's movies were a mixed bag, ranging from good to mediocre. Blue Hawaii was different. It was a huge success, and it set a new standard for Elvis's films. The movie was easy to make, and it didn't put Elvis at risk of being ridiculed. This formula set in an exotic location, featuring Elvis as a charismatic character with an exciting job, surrounded by attractive women, and including plenty of action and music, became the blueprint for his future films. Despite the success of Blue Hawaii, Elvis had the potential to take on more challenging roles. There were times when he showed promise, like in Flaming Star and Wild in the Country. These films, though not as commercially successful as Parker's expectations, hinted at Elvis's ability to handle more serious and complex characters. However, the pressure to maintain box office success and avoid any risks led Elvis and his manager, Colonel Parker, to stick with the proven formula. Elvis's movie projects became increasingly formulaic after Blue Hawaii. Most of his films were set in places like Las Vegas, Acapulco, or Florida, and he often played characters like pilots, race car drivers, or rodeo riders. These roles were designed to be exciting and safe, but they rarely challenged him as an actor. The movies always included romantic storylines, action sequences, and Elvis's signature musical performances. While these films were successful and made Elvis a global star, they rarely pushed him to grow as an artist. One of the few exceptions was Viva Las Vegas, a film Elvis made in 1963. He had a passionate off-screen relationship with his co-star, Anne Margaret, and this chemistry translated to the screen. The film was more energetic and engaging than his other projects, and it showed that Elvis could shine when he was challenged and inspired. However, Colonel Parker was wary of letting other stars share the spotlight, and he often intervened to ensure that Elvis remained the center of attention. This approach, while ensuring Elvis's continued stardom, also limited his opportunities to develop as an actor. The decline in the quality of Elvis's films became more apparent in the mid-1960s. To cut costs, Colonel Parker signed a deal with Sam Katzman, a producer known for making low-budget movies quickly. Katzman's approach shooting films in less than 3 weeks, using minimal location footage, and skimping on production values led to a noticeable drop in the quality of Elvis's movies. Scripts became absurd, The songs were often forgettable, and the films looked cheap. Despite this, the movies still made money, and Elvis's income from them even increased. The easy money and lavish lifestyle it provided kept Elvis making films, even though he was increasingly frustrated with the lack of creative fulfillment. Elvis's frustration sometimes boiled over into arguments with Colonel Parker. By the mid-1960s, Elvis's films were attracting smaller audiences, and his music was being overshadowed by new genres like Motown, California pop rock, and the British invasion. These confrontations were heated, but the bond between Elvis and Parker was too strong to break. Elvis preferred to let Parker handle the business side of things, even if it meant making decisions that didn't always align with his artistic goals. By 1966, Colonel Parker recognized the need to secure his own financial future. He renegotiated his agreement with Elvis, ensuring that he would receive a larger share of the profits from all of Elvis's ventures. This new deal, which came into effect on January 1, 1967, gave Parker unprecedented control over Elvis's career. While some viewed this as Parker's greed, it was also a way for him to protect his investment in a client whose popularity was waning. Elvis's personal life also began to impact his career. He had a close-knit group of friends known as the Memphis Mafia, who accompanied him everywhere. This group provided Elvis with comfort and companionship, but it also contributed to a lifestyle that sometimes interfered with his work. As the quality of his film projects declined, Elvis's lack of commitment became more evident, and Parker found himself having to make excuses for his client. In the early 1960s, Elvis's life had settled into a routine. He would travel to Los Angeles 3 times a year to make movies and record soundtracks, and he would return to Memphis between projects. By 1964, Elvis had stopped recording in Nashville and had settled into a large house in Bel Air, California, where some of his friends lived with him. This setup allowed Elvis to maintain a sense of normalcy, but it also reinforced a lifestyle that was increasingly insular and disconnected from the changing landscape of Hollywood. Despite the challenges and frustrations, Elvis continued to make movies. The easy money and the support of his friends kept him going, but the lack of creative fulfillment weighed heavily on him. The story of Elvis's Hollywood career is a complex one, marked by both success and missed opportunities. While Colonel Parker's influence was significant, Elvis's own choices and his reluctance to push for more challenging roles played a crucial role in shaping his trajectory. Elvis and his friends lived a wild and exciting life in Los Angeles, driven by amphetamines and endless parties. With their girlfriends and wives back in Memphis, they hosted extravagant gatherings at Presley's home in Bel Air, where they invited beautiful women who often waited at the front gate, hoping for a chance to meet Elvis. Movie stars would sometimes join in, but they were usually just co-stars Elvis had met on set. The party scene in Hollywood influenced Elvis, and he started serving liquor, though he still refused to touch marijuana or hard drugs. The women outnumbered the men, and once Elvis picked his companion for the evening, his friends would have their turn with the others. Elvis even installed a two-way mirror in the cabana, so he and his buddies could watch the women change. When they weren't partying, Elvis and his friends played touch football in local parks against other young actors. Elvis always played quarterback, and his team included new friends like Max Baer Jr., the star of the Beverly Hillbillies. They also loved riding motorcycles through the canyons of Beverly Hills and practicing karate, which they would demonstrate to guests and people at the studios. They took road trips to Las Vegas, where they partied hard with strippers and showgirls, staying up for days. Dressed in matching black mohair suits and carrying identical briefcases, they were known as the Memphis Mafia, a group that captured the attention of the press. In Memphis, things were a bit more subdued, but the atmosphere at Graceland changed dramatically after Elvis's mother, Gladys, passed away. With Vernon and his new wife living nearby, only Elvis's grandmother Minnie remained, and she mostly stayed in her room. This gave Elvis free rein to do as he pleased. The house became more like a whorehouse, according to Alan Fordes. Elvis still had steady girlfriends like Anita Wood, but he and his friends also brought in many of the women who gathered at Graceland's gates. They rented movie theaters, roller rinks, and the local amusement park to enjoy after hours. Graceland was redecorated to reflect Elvis's new Playboy image, and they spent their time singing gospel songs, listening to music, watching football, practicing karate, and playing with a custom-made go-kart and a stock car track. Elvis's relationship with his entourage was complex. They were his friends, but they also worked for him. Many were from the South, and provided a familiar presence in the alien world of Hollywood. Elvis didn't like the phoniness of Hollywood, and preferred the company of his friends. They helped him meet beautiful women and access a world far removed from their humble beginnings. They ran errands, took care of his cars and motorcycles, made arrangements for his activities, and ensured his homes were well stocked. For a while, Elvis only covered their living expenses, which caused financial strain for some. When this was brought to his attention, he started paying them salaries. The guys often competed for Elvis's favor, leading to jealousy and backbiting. Joe Esposito, who managed the group's expenses, was resented for trying to create an inner circle. Lamar Fike, who was often teased by Elvis, began to despise his tormentors. As Elvis's drug use increased, he became more unpredictable, firing people for minor mistakes and then offering generous gifts to bring them back. This created a tense environment where everyone had to be careful with their words and actions. Despite the good times, Elvis always had doubts about why his friends were there, and this insecurity was heightened by his drug use. Vernon, who managed Elvis's personal finances, was worried about the costs of maintaining homes in both Memphis and Los Angeles. He resented the expenses incurred by the entourage and feared they were leeches. When Elvis became interested in horseback riding, he bought horses for everyone and a 160-acre ranch in northern Mississippi called the Circle. G. Vernon was terrified this spending would lead to bankruptcy, especially as Elvis's movies were doing less well at the box office. By mid-1967, Elvis had lost interest in the ranch, and Vernon started selling off the assets. Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, initially tolerated Elvis's excesses, but became concerned when Elvis's appearance and attitude changed. Elvis had gained weight, and producers complained about his physique. He went on crash diets for movies but binge ate afterward, a pattern that would later affect his health. Parker noticed Elvis was no longer as reliable as before, and this worried him. In 1964, Elvis met Larry Geller, a Hollywood hairdresser who introduced him to New Age spiritualism. Elvis was fascinated and hired Geller to work for him full-time. They read books like Autobiography of a Yogi and visited the Self-Realization Fellowship Retreat. Elvis felt a deep connection to this spiritual journey, which provided him with inner peace. However, his new interest upset the daily routines and dismayed his entourage, who resented Geller. The parties and fun stopped, and when Elvis tried to get the guys to join his spiritual quest, they showed no interest. This hurt Elvis, and he withdrew, forming a closer bond with Geller. The guys shared their fears with Parker, who distrusted Geller and saw him as a threat to Elvis's career. Parker was frustrated that Elvis's energy was directed away from show business, and he struggled to find a way to regain influence over his star. Priscilla Beaulieu, you became a big part of Elvis Presley's life in a way no one expected. When Elvis returned from Germany, he and Priscilla kept in touch. Despite dating other women, he couldn't forget her. Priscilla, now 16, was determined to be with Elvis. Her parents finally agreed to let her visit him in Los Angeles, even though they were worried. During her visit, Elvis and Priscilla spent a lot of time together, and they planned for her to move to Memphis to be with him. In March 1963, Priscilla moved in with Elvis at Graceland. At first, they kept it a secret from the press and her parents. Priscilla was different from the other women in Elvis's life. She was young, devoted, and willing to do whatever he wanted. This made Elvis happy, and he even stopped seeing Anne Margaret, a famous actress he had met earlier. Elvis and Priscilla had a strong bond, but they faced challenges. Sometimes Elvis would go to Los Angeles for his movies, and Priscilla would read about his alleged romances in the gossip columns. This made her sad, and she started to assert herself more. Eventually, she convinced Elvis to let her and the other girlfriends visit him in Los Angeles. They even rented a new house for more privacy. Priscilla's presence changed the dynamic within Elvis's inner circle. She favored some of the guys, like Joe Esposito and Jerry Schilling, and they, in turn, included their wives in the group. This made other members of the entourage feel left out. Priscilla also became close to Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, who started to pressure Elvis to marry her. Elvis was hesitant, but the pressure from Parker and the media eventually led him to propose to Priscilla in December 1966. Their relationship wasn't perfect. Elvis tried to get Priscilla interested in his spiritual studies, but she didn't share his passion. This created tension, especially when Elvis decided to give up some of his pleasures to focus on his spiritual journey. Priscilla and the guys saw Larry Geller, Elvis's spiritual advisor, as a threat. In March 1967, Elvis had a bad accident that forced a delay in filming. Colonel Parker used this as an opportunity to assert his authority. He banned Elvis from reading spiritual books and limited his time with Geller. Priscilla and Elvis even burned a box of the banned books to symbolize a fresh start. Elvis and Priscilla got married on May 1, 1967, in Las Vegas. The wedding was kept secret, and only a few close friends were invited. After the wedding, Priscilla hoped for a normal married life, but Elvis's career demands soon took over. When she became pregnant, Elvis was thrilled and they grew closer. Their daughter, Lisa Marie, was born on February 1, 1968. Despite the joy of their marriage and family, Elvis's career and spiritual interests continued to create challenges. He was still influenced by his spiritual journey, and the demands of his movie career often left him feeling unfulfilled. In August 1965, Elvis met the Beatles, who were huge fans. The meeting was a bit awkward, and the Beatles noticed that Elvis seemed isolated and disinterested. By then, the Beatles had become more popular and innovative, while Elvis's movies and music were becoming less exciting. Elvis's movie career was struggling, and he felt stuck in a rut. His performances were no longer as strong, and he was losing confidence. Despite the challenges, Elvis and Priscilla continued to support each other, hoping for a brighter future. Elvis Presley, once the king of rock and roll, found himself struggling to keep up with the changing times. After his hit, Crying in the Chapel, in 1965, his singles didn't sell as well as they used to, often selling fewer than 500,000 copies and rarely making the top 10. The music scene was dominated by the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and other artists who were bringing new energy and creativity to rock and roll. Elvis's music, especially the songs from his movies, seemed old-fashioned and out of touch. By 1966, Elvis's audience was mostly made up of older fans who had loved him since his early days. Younger listeners, part of the baby boom generation, were more interested in the new, more complex and sophisticated music being created by artists like Bob Dylan and the Beatles. For these teenagers, Elvis was a part of the past, a symbol of the old guard. The music industry was also changing. New artists were more focused on writing their own songs and pushing the boundaries of what rock and roll could be. They saw themselves as artists, not just entertainers. Elvis, however, was always more comfortable as an entertainer. He loved all kinds of music and wanted to please his audience, not necessarily to break new ground. This made it hard for him to connect with the new generation of music fans. Elvis was bothered by these changes, especially the success of the Beatles. He felt threatened by their artistic freedom and the way they were able to evolve and stay relevant. Despite this, he was still interested in the new music. He enjoyed the folk music of Peter, Paul and Mary and Simon and Garfunkel, and even started to appreciate some of Bob Dylan's songs. In 1966, Elvis and his manager, Colonel Parker, decided it was time for a change. They scheduled a recording session in Nashville, hoping to create some non-soundtrack material that could reinvigorate Elvis's career. At the session, Elvis met Felton Jarvis, a producer who understood what Elvis was trying to achieve. Jarvis helped Elvis record a mix of gospel, R&B, and country songs, and Elvis worked harder than he had in years. The gospel album, How Great Thou Art, released in 1967, was a highlight of this period, showing Elvis's deep emotional connection to the music. Elvis also recorded some great R&B and ballads, but the singles from these sessions didn't perform well on the charts. Love Letters and Indescribably Blue were both disappointments, and Elvis's audience remained small and loyal, mostly older fans who had followed him since the beginning. In 1967, Elvis returned to the studio to record Guitar Man with Jerry Reed. The session produced some excellent R&B inspired songs that showed Elvis's versatility and the hotter sound he and Jarvis were aiming for. However, a dispute over publishing rights caused some of the songs to be shelved, and the singles that were released didn't do as well as expected. By early 1968, despite the artistic success of his recent recordings, Elvis was still seen as a relic of the past by many music fans. His new singles struggled to get airplay, and he was largely confined to the diehards who would buy anything he released. For younger fans, Elvis was a historical figure, remembered for his movies and the music that had once defined a generation, but no longer part of the new and exciting music scene. Despite the challenges, Elvis's passion for music never waned. He continued to explore different styles and experiment in the studio, always hoping to reconnect with a wider audience and prove that he could still be relevant in the ever-changing world of rock and roll.